Continuing from before, all members of the Mount Hua sect were conducting a ceremony to welcome back the second-generation disciples after 3 years of seclusion. Among them was a handsome senior disciple who had just entered. He immediately recognized Chung Myung as the kid from the tavern in town and, feeling superior, decided to intimidate Chung Myung a bit to fulfill his duty of teaching juniors. Myung knew that he would soon face a lot of trouble with this guy. Hearing senior brother Joel Gun introduce him as Baek Chun, famed for his overwhelming presence and known as a genius among geniuses of the Mount Hua sect, Myung could see why. Meanwhile, Baek Chun and the other disciples were reporting their training results to the sect leader. The sect leader was very pleased and hoped that this batch of disciples would be the highlight of the upcoming martial arts competition. He then ordered the heads to prepare a small banquet to celebrate. After that, he called Chung Myung over for a talk, but only when he was coaxed with candy did he agree to listen. Baek Chun witnessed all this and was extremely astonished, wondering why that kid was treated so badly. At the banquet, he was even more shocked. The food was incredibly lavish, with roasted chicken and meat. Previously, Mount Hua was the only sect that had to beg for food and live in debt. How much had changed? The supervising teacher sitting next to him understood Baek Chun's feelings and promised to explain everything later. For now, he just needed to know that a blessing had come to Mount Hua. Just as he finished speaking, there was a loud bang as the door was kicked open, drawing everyone's attention. It was the very blessing the teacher had mentioned. Chung Myung, looking extremely angry, stormed toward the dining table, seemingly having encountered something unpleasant. Baek Chun waited for a while, but no one reacted to the incident. Why didn't anyone say anything to that junior? Even someone as strict about manners as the supervising teacher treated it as a normal occurrence. Baek Chun silently realized that this kid had everyone wrapped around his finger and resolved to straighten things out later. On the other side, senior brother Joel Gun inquired and learned that the sect leader had again sent Myung to deliver a message to the Yunha trading group because he was the fastest runner. Why was he always being sent on errands? Was there nothing else to do? A while later, Yu Isial arrived at the banquet. Known as the most beautiful woman of Mount Hua, she had long caught Baek Chun's attention. Seeing her, Baek Chun happily called her over, but she seemed uninterested in stopping and appeared to be looking for something. Spotting her target, she walked straight to Myung and asked if she could sit with him. All eyes turned to them in surprise. They couldn't believe she was talking to a man. They were even more astonished when Myung refused her offer to sit together. Myung found this very troublesome, waved her away because he was busy eating, and didn't even bother using honorifics. But the beauty stubbornly sat down, saying she would wait until he finished eating to talk. The disciples couldn't contain their excitement, standing up to watch the scene unfold. The tension in the air was broken by Baek Chun's cough, making everyone pause. He then demanded that Chung Myung listen to Yu Isial out of respect for his seniors in the sect. Thinking he could get a hold of the kid, Baek Chun was surprised when Chung Myung turned it around on Yu Isial, telling her she should apologize to her senior. In a communal banquet, asking someone to talk privately for personal reasons was inappropriate. His reasoning was sound, and Yu Isial obediently bowed her head, leaving Baek Chun flustered. Chung Myung didn't stop there and reminded her to apologize to the supervising teacher as well. Unexpectedly, she did so sincerely. Baek Chun was speechless, seeing his crush being handled like a child, making him furious. Even his junior brothers were wary. This time, he decided not to let the insolent kid off, so he prepared to strike but instead ceremoniously reported to the supervising teacher about Chung Myung sneaking out to drink, a serious violation of Mount Hua's rules. In the end, he was humiliated once again when the teacher defended the boy, stating that he had the sect leader's permission. Back in his room, Baek Chun tried to contain his anger, calming himself to figure out a way to deal with the situation. Mount Hua had been a small, decrepit sect, weak as a cup of watered-down tea, with all hopes pinned on the second-generation disciples, and Baek Chun was the most outstanding among them. But now everything had changed, and he wondered what that kid had done to earn such protection. Regardless, he was still the one entrusted with reviving Mount Hua's lost reputation. Knowing that understanding one's enemy is key to victory, he called Yun Zhang over to inquire and learned that Chung Myung was the one who had resolved all economic difficulties, helping Mount Hua become prosperous. However, regardless of how much money was made, this was still a martial sect at its core. If the kid had martial skills, it would be good, but if not, Baek Chun would show him that seniors are not to be trifled with. Senior brother Yun Zhang, returning from Baek Chun's place, looked at Chung Myung, who was lying drunk, and was too exasperated to speak. Where did the idea of a disciple arguing with a senior come from? Furthermore, it was senior uncle Baek Chun, who was not particularly strict with third-generation disciples. If this good relationship was broken, Mount Hua would no longer be peaceful. The sect leader had also heard about the incident in the dining hall today. He fully understood that the second-generation disciples returning after a long time would naturally be distant from the new disciples, but sometimes it's best to let things pass naturally. The supervising teacher did not entirely understand the sect leader's perspective, as this was an issue among the disciples, and if left unchecked, it could lead to a major conflict. The sect leader immediately interrupted, believing that Baek Chun, being thoughtful, would not let this affect brotherly feelings. It was then that the supervising teacher realized the sect leader had misunderstood from the beginning. The issue wasn't with Baek Chun but with that kid Chung Myung. In the sect leader's eyes, he was just a cute pup bringing fortune to Mount Hua, so he was never punished. The supervising teacher quietly thought that Mount Hua was about to face big trouble. As usual, the disciples were sprawled around the courtyard after training when the seniors entered. They walked around, scolding the juniors for lazily lying about instead of training. After today, everyone was punished to clean all the doors until not a speck of dust remained. They then left, leaving everyone puzzled. What just happened, and why the cleaning? Senior brother Joel Gun also sat in confusion, suspecting the cause was Chung Myung. 3 days later, Joel Gun couldn't bear the new rules set by the seniors any longer. They brought out old regulations, making everyone follow them. The most annoying was the pointless task of cleaning doors or making everyone suffer for one person's mistake. Senior brother Yoon Jong also acknowledged that it was clear they were trying to torment them. He glanced at Myung, suggesting he should placate the seniors a bit, hoping things would pass. Chung Myung immediately sprang up, saying he had a better idea than Yoon Jong's. He opened the door and revealed his plan, to beat up those seniors. Sensing impending disaster, Yoon Jong shouted for everyone to restrain the mad dog before it was too late. Although they didn't understand, everyone rushed to stop the kid from escaping, creating complete chaos. Just as Chung Myung neared the main door, 2 disciples pinned him down, and soon everyone was piling on him. It was like taming a wild beast. Chung Myung angrily demanded to be let go, insisting he just wanted to hit them once. 100 years ago, no one dared bully him like those despicable seniors. It was only when Yoon Jong urgently reminded him that the Mount Hua and Southern Edge conference were approaching, and any incident involving the disciples would ruin their sect's reputation. He pleaded that Myung endure a bit longer, even if bullied by Baek Chun, rather than being scorned by the Southern Sect. Moved by Yoon Jong's sincere plea and for the sake of the sect's greater good, Chung Myung gradually calmed down. So, he only needed to endure until the conference ended, right? After all the hardships, he would accept this small request, but if the other side initiated the fight, he would deal with it himself. A week passed, and Baek Chun grew increasingly anxious as things were not going according to plan. The disciples displayed their anger but did not retaliate, nor did they speak disrespectfully. He had thought that cleverly setting them up to make mistakes would make them afraid to resist. It seemed that the kid wasn't just insolent but also had remarkable patience, so he needed to be taught differently. At night, Chung Myung continued his secret sword practice, but he had to be more careful lately as he had been caught twice by that senior sister. He could no longer return to his usual spots. Even within Mount Hua, she always seemed to be tailing him, wanting to talk. If he could sense her presence, he could avoid her, but her aura was so faint it was almost ghostly. Muttering to himself, Chung Myung drew his sword, only to see a ghostly image reflected. He nearly had a heart attack, realizing he couldn't sense her at all. Yu Isial finally found a chance to talk privately with him, demanding he teach her the sword technique that made the plum blossoms bloom, revealing she had seen it long before coming here. Knowing that the plum blossom sword technique was only passed down to the elders, and since all the elders were killed on the summit of 10,000 peaks by the demon lord, Chung Myung realized he was the only one who knew it. He tried to probe further, but Yu Isial, with a tinge of sadness, didn't want to reveal more. Still, she was determined to learn it and drew her sword, forcing Chung Myung to teach her. Thus, a fierce duel ensued. Chung Myung noticed that she was fully aware of his abilities, attacking with lethal precision. Her sword movements were swift and graceful, suddenly exploiting her opponent's weaknesses. As the fight progressed, her eyes became fiercer, her deadly accuracy increasing, making it hard for Chung Myung to evade. She only stopped when exhausted. Seeing her eyes return to normal, Chung Myung understood she was in a state of sword intoxication, a state where a swordsman can unleash their most lethal moves, finding their sword path. This process required extreme caution as any wrong move could lead to the worst case, going berserk. Realizing he was in trouble but intrigued by such a talent, Chung Myung decided to stay and observe further. He noticed her sword speed was impressive but had many flaws. Each strike she made was skillfully corrected by Chung Myung using his sword scabbard. After a while, Yu Isial completely entered a state of selflessness. This was a crucial moment for a swordsman. If she were abruptly awakened, it could be dangerous. She looked so dumb in this state, and it would be better if she were always this docile. Suddenly, a loud shout echoed, shaking the area. It was Baek Chun, furious, channeling his energy into his sword as he rushed down. Knowing that if Baek Chun caused a disturbance here, Yu Isial could be in danger, Chung Myung didn't hesitate, kicking Baek Chun away. Slowly standing up, Baek Chun was astonished that Chung Myung hadn't even drawn his sword yet had such immense power. Refusing to accept this, Baek Chun pointed his sword at Myung, challenging him to a duel. Eager for this, but Myung felt a bit sorry for Yu Isial. Just a bit more time intervening in her selfless state and guiding her swordsmanship, and she could reach a higher level. But that wretched Baek Chun had to appear. Suppressing his anger, Chung Myung agreed to Baek Chun's challenge. However, to prevent him from tattling like last time, he made him swear not to reveal anything that happened here to anyone. Baek Chun, thrilled, agreed. In this duel, I am not your senior uncle and all my grievances with you will be settled after this match. He didn't expect that as soon as he finished speaking, a dense killing intent emanated from Chung Myung. He walked forward like a demon, explaining that this wasn't a duel but more of a punishment. Faced with such overwhelming pressure, Baek Chun felt a bit scared but reassured himself that Chung Myung was just a kid. He charged with his sword, launching a flurry of attacks. Chung Myung didn't respond immediately. Instead, he wanted to see what results these second-generation disciples had achieved after their secluded training. However, Baek Chun's swordsmanship was quite rough, with techniques that were changing but still clumsy. Moreover, it had a resemblance to the Southern Sect style. With just a few more observations, he confirmed that these pathetic disciples were indeed imitating the Southern Sect's sword techniques. Baek Chun continued his furious assault on Chung Myung, determined to correct this insolent kid's behavior. The opportune moment arrived, and Chung Myung gathered his energy into one hand, delivering a devastating blow to Baek Chun's face, sending him crashing into the mountain wall, and causing a massive explosion. As the dust settled, Chung Myung was somewhat surprised that Baek Chun, after taking such a hit, could still stand up. He's truly tough, Chung Myung thought as he calmly approached and pointed out the severe flaws in Baek Chun's sword technique. You might advance a bit with this, but you'll only reach a certain limit. Soon, the junior disciples will surpass you. Although I want to use my fists, you're a promising disciple of Mount Hua, so I'll use a sword to teach you. Hopefully, after this, you'll improve a bit. Baek Chun, still dazed, hadn't grasped what was happening when he suddenly turned pale with fear at the sight before him. Hundreds of swords were flying towards him at an insane speed, forcing him to retreat instinctively. However, it was too late to escape. He was pummeled by a wooden sword all over his body, first his lower body, then his shoulders, wrists, knees, and feet. The repeated attacks caused him excruciating pain, almost knocking him unconscious. Only when Baek Chun could no longer bear it, dropping his sword in surrender, did Chung Myung pause. Baek Chun thought it was over, but as he looked up, he saw Chung Myung swinging his sword, preparing for another strike. He vaguely heard Chung Myung shout about aiming for his head before a series of blows rained down, making his head feel like it would explode. Each time Chung Myung brought down the wooden sword, he shouted in anger. Only when Baek Chun was on the verge of passing out did Chung Myung stop. Even in the moment of collapse, Baek Chun had a sense of defiance. Why did he shout 5 times but hit me 6 times, he wondered until he completely blacked out. It was unclear how much time had passed when Baek Chun finally woke up, his head throbbing. As he opened his eyes, a familiar but terrifying face appeared right in front of him, making him jump. After calming down, Baek Chun realized he had truly lost. Casting aside all pride, he forced himself to ask Chung Myung how he had become so strong. Hearing the response, "It's not that I'm strong, you're just too weak," Baek Chun couldn't accept it and retorted that he had trained diligently. "I'm the senior brother of the second-generation disciples and the future leader of Mount Hua." Immediately, Chung Myung interrupted, calling him a frog in a well. "Since you returned, I haven't seen any results from your efforts. After your secluded training, you just indulged in eating, drinking, and fooling around. With the Flower Sect conference approaching, you waste time bullying junior disciples. Reducing the things you enjoy is a true effort. What you've been doing is trying to be a king in a small well called Mount Hua. Disciples from the other sects are already soaring high, while you can only run a little and think you're great. Wake up, frog." Reflecting deeply, Baek Chun started to realize something and asked, "Are there countless people stronger than you in other sects?" Unexpectedly, the nonchalant answer came, "Of course, I'm the strongest. But when you were beaten, it wasn't because I'm strong, it's because you're too weak. With your current strength, you can't even beat the Southern Sect. Not to mention the disciples of Shaolin, Wudong, or the world-renowned Namgung family, full of outstanding martial artists." Feeling enlightened, Baek Chun immediately knelt, begging Chung Myung to help him become stronger. "I'll do whatever you say, even calling you senior brother, so please help me." He thought lowering himself would suffice but was met with a cold refusal from Chung Myung. I don't like it, it's too troublesome. He added that their duel wasn't over. Standing up with a demonic glint in his eyes, Chung Myung scolded Baek Chun for not reflecting on his mistakes. Do you think you've paid enough for your past mistakes? From now on, I'll thoroughly explain why you're weak and why you shouldn't mess with me. With a wicked smile, Chung Myung furiously brought down the wooden sword, and Baek Chun's screams echoed through the mountains. Unfortunately, this didn't reach Mount Hua. Finally, with the work done, Myung lay down on the ground, looking very satisfied as if he had lifted a great burden off his shoulders. After a while, he noticed there was no movement and turned to see Baek Chun lying limp like a dough ball, motionless on the ground. Chung Myung chuckled, scolding him for being overly dramatic. It wasn't as if he couldn't move at all. Before he could finish laughing, a ghostly face appeared right in front of him, making him jump. It was Yu Isial, who had been squatting there for who knows how long. At this rate, I'll die of a heart attack, Myung muttered. She had woken up when he was thrashing Baek Chun, who now lay in a heap like a used rag. Chung Myung was now looking intently at her head, contemplating whether hitting her hard enough on the neck might make her forget everything that had just happened. Sensing this, Yu Isial broke into a sweat, quickly assuring him she had already forgotten everything. Despite being a bit slow-witted, she knew how to be tactful. Returning to the matter of learning the plum blossom sword technique, she said, I can't tell you the reason, but I must learn that sword technique at all costs. Seeing her earnest eyes, Myung said nothing. He stood up, channeled his energy into his finger, and swiftly moved it through the air, creating a sword path. Yu Isial watched closely and realized this was the sword of the Yu maiden she had spent a lot of time learning, but it had slight differences in movement and fundamental attributes. She then realized that without reaching a certain level, she couldn't learn it. So, I need to cultivate what I have and build a solid foundation first, right? She asked. Myung, somewhat surprised by her insight, thought she wasn't as dumb as she seemed. Before leaving, Myung made sure she promised never to reveal what happened that night. Seeing her agreement, he patted her head and praised her for being obedient, unlike before. But when he saw her sword trembling in her hand, he quickly ran off, reminding her not to come looking for him unless she was ready, as it would be a hassle. Sitting there, Yu Isial sighed. She recalled the scene of plum blossoms blooming after her father's sword technique ended. He had promised her that he would restore the sword technique and return to Mount Hua to make amends. Isial, come with me, there's no place better than Mount Hua, he had said. She remembered that at the end of his sword technique, the plum blossoms hadn't fully bloomed. But now, someone who could make the blossoms bloom had appeared. She had to learn it no matter what. By early morning, Chung Myung entered to find his two senior brothers waiting for him. Joel Gun, looking panicked, informed him that something big had happened. Baek Chun had gone missing, and the other senior uncles were searching for him. Yoon Jong, chuckling softly, asked if Myung had anything to do with it. After some hemming and hawing, Chung Myung calmly admitted, I didn't beat him up, I just pounded him like a mad dog. Yoon Jong, initially relieved, quickly grew alarmed. Grabbing Myung by the collar, he scolded him for doing something so reckless and asked if he understood the magnitude of what he had done. Myung, unfazed, kicked him to the ground and explained that everything had been handled smoothly, so there was no need to worry. Despite this, Yoon Jong, the senior brother, sat crying miserably. Myung had to recount how Baek Chun had asked for martial arts instruction, and when he refused, he gave him a beating but assured him there was nothing to worry about. Go to sleep, and by morning, everything will be clear. With that, Myung wearily headed to his room, leaving the two bewildered and sighing heavily. The next morning, the two senior brothers, as usual, stood outside, expecting to be reprimanded by the senior uncles. Strangely, even past the usual time, the training ground was still empty. Could it be that the kids' words were true? Only now did they start to realize that resolving the issue by defeating the senior was indeed possible. This meant that even compared to the Southern Sect, Chung Myung wouldn't be inferior. This time, participating in the Flower Sect conference, there was certainly a chance of victory. Yoon Jong sighed, feeling this wasn't entirely good news. Of course, having a master in the sect was worth celebrating, but if there was only one master, it wouldn't make much difference. If Chung Myung disappeared, Mount Hua would fall apart like before. To truly rebuild Mount Hua, they had to become stronger. As they passionately discussed this, they were interrupted by shouting in the distance. It was Chung Myung, panicking and running as if being chased by a ghost, pleading with Yu Isial to stop following him because he had nothing to teach her. Behind him, Yu Isial was closely pursuing Chung Myung, insisting that only he knew the sword of the Yu maiden and she had to learn it from him. From a distance, Baek Chun was watching this absurd scene, unable to say anything. He was clutching his stomach, cursing that brat for being so ruthless as to beat him without leaving any external marks. Although this had spared Baek Chun from humiliation in front of everyone, he couldn't shake off the resentment. Chung Myung's sudden appearance disrupted his plans, but he still had to achieve his goal of proving himself at the Flower Sect conference. This important event was drawing closer, leading to increasingly frequent meetings between the sect leader and the overseer. Reported that the preparations for welcoming the Southern Sect were complete. This time will be different from the past when we only had meager meals and a rundown training ground, he thought. The boy had helped them a lot, not just with food but also in restoring their dignity. The sect leader took a sip of tea and asked, "How is the flavor today?" The overseer replied, "The scent seems stronger than before. It was dried for a long time, and now the fragrance has only faded a bit." The sect leader mused, "Dried plum blossoms have a more intense aroma. I, too, am like these withered petals, just enduring. I said we would restore our former glory, but enduring each day is truly difficult. However, by enduring, we have finally reached this day. Sometimes, to get an answer, you just need to wait without any schemes or tactics." The sect leader's words contained profound and mysterious wisdom, and the overseer felt assured, believing that under the current sect leader, Mount Hua would certainly regain its former glory. The sect leader was pleased to hear these words, but if this became a reality, it wouldn't be due to his efforts but the disciples' hard work. He acknowledged his shortcomings, thinking that if Mount Hua hadn't fallen into such a state, he would never have become the sect leader. If his senior brothers hadn't left Mount Hua, he would probably still be studying the Taoist scriptures, living day by day. The overseer, feeling indignant, thought to himself that their departure proved they were unfit to be the sect leader. The current leader was the rightful master of Mount Hua. Hearing this, the sect leader simply smiled gently and began inquiring about the training progress of the second-generation disciples. The overseer, not fully confident, expressed his concerns, although he didn't finish his sentence. The sect leader understood that there was still a significant gap between Mount Hua and the Southern Sect. However, when he asked about the third-generation disciples, the overseer became enthusiastic, noting their diligent preparation and even excessive eagerness. Yet, seeing the overseer's hesitation, the sect leader nodded understandingly, acknowledging his worries. He explained that the Flower Sect conference was merely an exchange, and winning or losing wasn't important. The ultimate goal was to gain experience for future development. "Don't worry too much, everything will proceed in due course." After the overseer left, the sect leader continued to stare into his steaming teacup, reflecting his heavy heart. He muttered to himself, realizing that being a Taoist required lying without hesitation. Winning or losing was indeed more important than anything else. Without a miracle, they couldn't defeat the Southern Sect this time. Meanwhile, the disciples of the Southern Sect had reached the foot of the mountain. Looking around, mocking that this place was still as small as ever. It was hard to believe that this sect had once been part of the 10 Great Sect. Another disciple, Jin Jumryong, who looked like a statue, stepped forward and confirmed with a smile that it was indeed true. Thanks to Mount Hua, this place had developed into what it is now, proving that the sect had a strong standing in the past. Zhang Xiaohan still expressed disdain, noting that the place was becoming increasingly run down and wasn't worth coming to just a duel with the weaklings of Mount Hua. What a waste of time, he thought. Suddenly, he looked back and loudly remarked that this was also a great opportunity to avenge the disciples who had been humiliated. After waiting for a moment, he noticed that the third disciple, Song Baek, showed no reaction, making him disappointed. Since causing that major incident, Song Baek had become more reserved and no longer interesting. Song Baek paid no attention to those words, instead gazing up at Mount Hua after 2 years apart. He recalled that back then, the place was just a small village. Now, every time he looked at Mount Hua, he thought of the monster named Chung Myung. Perhaps they were walking into the tiger's den. As they hadn't even reached the summit yet, the group was already complaining. Frustrated by the challenging path, Yong Xiaohan began mocking again. It's because they built their sect in such a treacherous place that they've gradually declined. The other disciples, still panting heavily, agreed that this rundown sect would surely exhaust them to death, and in the end, they'd be eating roots and staying in dilapidated halls. One disciple beside him shuddered at the thought. Memories of the past made him feel sick to his stomach. He wondered why the elders continued to maintain these tedious competitions. Perhaps even 100 years from now, they would still be the same. Unable to endure the scornful remarks of his peers any longer, Song Baek spoke up, "I think everyone shouldn't underestimate Mount Hua, because if we become complacent, we'll end up thoroughly humiliated." The atmosphere grew tense. Seeing everyone turning their eyes toward Song Baek, Yong Xiaohan mockingly suggested that Song Baek should rest assured, as they wouldn't do anything to let Mount Hua regain its momentum like Song Baek did. Despite the provocation, Song Baek remained calm. However, he knew that saying anything further would be pointless, given the criticism and disdain he had faced due to Chung Myung's actions at the Yunha Merchant Guild. Nonetheless, Song Baek issued one final warning: if you let your guard down, you'll pay a very high price for it. Just then, a voice chimed in support. Song Baek is not wrong. It was Elder Sima Sung, who was responsible for leading the Southern Edge disciples. He reminded them of the disgrace they faced when they were humiliated by a sect on the brink of collapse, something they must never forget. The sect leader intended to put an end to the relationship with Mount Hua through the gathering this time. Our task is not just to defeat Mount Hua, but to crush their spirit as well, he emphasized. The group responded in unison, pledging their obedience to Elder Sima Sung, and continued their climb to the summit. However, they had no real idea that they were stepping into a tiger's den. And that's the end. Please like and subscribe to my channel to motivate me to create more content. Thank you very much. Peace.